All right. All right. Did it? Yes. Okay. So we're back for the second half of the Pint of Science. You can see three new faces behind me. From your left to right, we got Billy de Haas, Christian Zuidema, and Mark van Duin. They are going to talk about their respective fields. So first up, I'd like to welcome to the stage Christian Zuidema.
Hey. Well, thank you. I'm assuming it works, right? Because that's always a big point. Does the present... Yay, it does. Now that's a good sign. What I want to do with you in the next 10 minutes is to talk a little bit, not necessarily about my vision for the Netherlands in 2050, but more the kind of questions we need to engage with. So it is related to what might be a vision for that future, but it's definitely related to the kind of things that we probably have to face in the next couple of decades. And those are a couple of big things that relate to a lot of other stuff than only planning, of course. Definitely also than only environment and infrastructure planning. But nevertheless, there are a couple of things. I will start off with just having this quote. This is Steve Ballmer, and he said in 2007 that there is no chance that the iPhone is going to get any significant market share. No chance. Now, there were more people in 2007 who might have thought that, but he was the CEO of Microsoft. You would kind of expect somebody like that, an expert in that field, to know a bit better. But the reality of the matter is predicting the future is hard. And we don't know what 2050 will look like. But we do know a couple of things. What we know, for example, is that these two pictures, and you might think, oh yeah, that's the Grote Markt and the train station. They were both taken in 1990. That's 30 years ago. I don't see a lot of difference on those two pictures. Only if you zoom in you might see some differences. Some things don't change that much, and we do have some ability to predict things. One thing we know, and it's obvious that I start there because I work a lot on that, but don't worry, I will tap into some other things, is energy transition. The Netherlands is producing somewhere around 7-8% of its energy based on renewables. And in 2050, according to the current policies of the Netherlands, that has to be close to 100%. Now, if that has to be close to 100%, that means that we're going to see a lot more wind farms in our land. We're going to see biomass plants, small units, bigger units. We're going to see a lot of refurbishment of existing houses. Basically, all the houses from before the mid-1980s will have to be refurbished to some degree if we want to get it done. And we're going to see a lot more solar fields and maybe some other technologies. That is already changing our landscape. And in the next couple of decades, it will do that a lot more. And not just onshore, but also offshore. An impression which kind of relates to the current visions and scenarios that a lot of the big governments have of how the North Sea is going to look like. And all the white spots are wind farms. Our North Sea, a giant energy plant. Now, to get that done, that's a lot of work, a lot of regulations, and a lot of steel. That's a lot of stuff that you might expect. But also mobility, we're already seeing the change. The most valued company that makes cars nowadays is Tesla, because everybody is betting on electric vehicles. And it's probably not only going to be electric vehicles that at all kinds of places have to be charged, have to store energy, have to be able to drive around. They might be self-driving. It's quite likely. And that will change our infrastructure system. It is not at all likely that we might actually even need less roads, because they can drive more efficiently on the same amount of square meters. And that this road, which used to be a more or less 4-lane highway, which has changed into a friendly little city road, that we're going to see much more of that. That might actually deliver space. And what about a hyperloop? I don't know, I'm not an expert. But we are going to see a couple of changes in that direction, especially if we are, which Corona is suggesting, not that enthusiastic anymore about everybody flying everywhere all around. And climate change, that's an obvious one. I have here a picture of the droughts. This is a picture from the Netherlands, where you see that the crops don't grow. It was taken last year, and this year wasn't much better. We see here natural areas that used to be wetlands. Well, not this summer, not last summer, and not the summer before, because it's too dry. We're also seeing all kinds of changes where we know that we have to store the water more so that we can use it in dry periods, which change the cities. Get rid of the stones, get rid of the asphalt, make green roofs. We're starting to do that, but you can bet that in 2050 we'll have to do a lot more if we want to cope with things like droughts. At the same time, agriculture in the Netherlands is heavily strained at the moment, for different reasons. Here we have a picture, and you might think, what is that? Well, that's a place in one of the polders in the west of the country where the salt water from the sea is coming up. We're pumping away the fresh water just to keep that place dry, and by doing that we kind of draw in the salty water from the sea. And the further the ground goes down and the more the sea goes up, the more we're going to face this problem. These are the regions where we kind of worry that in the future agriculture might not be possible if we don't adapt our water system and if we don't adapt the kind of crops we grow there. That's a big proportion. And then we talk about nitrogen. Nitrogen, which is a logical problem in the Netherlands, because this country is next to the United States of America the second largest exporter of food in the world. More than China, more than Russia, more than Canada, more than Brazil. It's almost not comprehensible, but we do that because we import a lot of feed stuff, give it to all kinds of pigs, cows, etc., and those are being exported. That has an implication. There's way too much nitrogen, and that's basically killing nature, but also having other problematic effects. If we don't transform our agricultural system because of climate change, the droughts, the salt, maybe floods, but also nitrogen, our nature is basically gone. This is kind of an impression. All the areas that might in 2050 already be too dry to really have agriculture on a significant level, and the orange areas, the areas that might be too salt. Now we might be able to prevent that to some degree by keeping water in all kinds of places, having more wetlands, making sure you store it before it goes away. Those are all kinds of measures that demand planning. They demand things from engineering to land use to institutional changes, but also to cope with the interest of the farmers, the interest of the people. That's not an easy one. But that's not the only one when you talk about climate change. Because water management has always been important in this country. Much of it is below sea level, as you are well aware of. But if we think about what's going to happen in the next decades, and especially the period after that, we're going to have to do major investments. It is very doubtful whether something like this, our flood defense system in the southwest, is going to be able to cope with sea level rise up until the year 2100. Which means that we have to be starting with slowly adapting that already now. Because if you have to do that at the end of the century, you're way too late. You have to start doing that now. We are probably going to put a lot of more sand towards our dunes. If we don't, the sea will slowly take them. And that's a process that is already happening, that is already increasing, and that will only increase in the decades to come. We know that, and it's going to be a serious one. And we also know that the room that we are creating for our rivers to be able to store the water and not have them going too high, that will also have to increase. Because we will face moments where there's much more rain, but we also will face moments when there's hardly any rain, and we kind of want the water to be stored. That kind of process is not a one-way thing we've done in the past 20 years. That will continue and likely only increase. That's a lot of investment, a lot of debate, a lot of institutions. And we might even have to consider our landscape in a more fundamental way. Because the very simple fact is that if the sea level rises more and more and more, it is doubtful whether in the long run we're going to be able to sustain parts of this country as dry land. That sounds quite radical. But I'll show you a few figures in the last 2 slides that will convince you that it might not. Are we still going to do agriculture in the green heart? Or are we going to return that into nature areas where there's water and we can have the water level a bit higher to prevent all the silt from coming in and to kind of have less risk of flooding? Are we going to build more underwater? Well, we might actually have to do that. It is doubtful whether in the long run we're going to be able to sustain building in those areas if we're not doing something like that. And at 2050 we're at a point where we definitely have to have started with either one of those options. And if we really look to the long term, and don't worry about that because this is basically the last slide, sea level rise projections are vague. We're not fundamentally certain about these things. Like I said in the first slide, the future is not one that is easy to predict. But what we do know is that conventional estimates from the years 2014 to 18 are showing that we should expect somewhere between half a meter and a meter sea level rise for the Netherlands. We can deal with that. It's going to be costly, but we can deal with that. Current data, more recent, is showing that that might actually be a bit too optimistic. There's a serious chance it's going to be more, and it might actually already in the year 2100 go up to 3 meters. And what we also know is our current flood defense system, even if we do all the engineering, even if we change our river system, even if we constantly put sand on our dunes, is probably not going to be able with anything higher than 2 meters. If that happens, we basically have to start abandoning parts of the country. That's what the experts are telling us. That's 2100. Well, we don't know a lot now, but in 20 to 30 years, we're going to know more about that. How bad is it going to be? And be aware, climate change doesn't necessarily stop at 2100. Projections for 2200 are 2 to 4 meter conventional, and the first estimates, those are worst case scenarios, are suggesting it might go as high as 8 meters. Now think about that. This is a country that over 1,000 years has more or less battled with the sea, and if we are going to face this, it's going to be a very different battle. It's going to be a battle of trying to reinvent this country. Now that's long term, and that's a question mark, because I can also not predict the future in detail. But what we do know is these are challenges that are already starting to affect the choices we make today. And we have to contemplate what kind of Netherlands we want. If you ask me, any vision for the future of the Netherlands should already incorporate thinking about, should we still do a lot of investments and very high urbanization in new districts in places that are low-lying, or should we start doing that somewhere else? Should we start to reconsider where we put all our biggest places of growth, also economically? Those are the kind of questions that we slowly should be asking. Now that's the kind of debates we're in, and that's on the one hand a dooming picture, but on the other hand also a very clear illustration why a study such as you are all doing, but, and that's logical that I say that, environmental infrastructure planning, possibly even more, are quite relevant, because there's a task ahead of us, and many of you are going to be part of at least a couple of those tasks somewhere in the future. Maybe not tomorrow, maybe not in 2030, but in 2050, you have to be an extreme optimist to believe that not some of those things are going to be relevant at that moment. So, without wanting to depress you, have a nice weekend.
Yes, thank you, Chris, for your possibly quite glooming talk. So now I would like to give the floor to Billy. I will clean the microphone first as well.
Yes, that's me. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Billy de Haas. I coordinate the Master Population Studies. And maybe first to start, who here is enrolled in the Master Population Studies? Can you raise your hands? Okay, Jeroen, Tobias, that's it? Okay, so for this, what we're going to do now, this exercise, I mean, if we're going to be flooded by 2050, then it doesn't have any use of doing this exercise. But if we're still here, then I'm going to need the help of Jeroen and Tobias, but also of all of you. Because as you may know, population studies, it's about a lot of things. We're studying population. But some decades ago, we didn't study population this broadly. We were just hardcore demographers. And we're now, for the next 10 minutes, all of you, we're all going to be hardcore demographers. We're going back to the basics. I'm sure many of you have taken some demography classes, maybe population geographies. Did you? Okay. Well, anyway, population projections for the Netherlands in 2050. Like Chris already said, it's very hard to predict the future, but as demographers we still try to believe, or we want to believe, that at least we can project the future. When we asked Statistics Netherlands by the end of December last year, they said in the Netherlands at this moment we have 17,415,000 inhabitants. Now, if we project this to 2050, we think it will be 19 million. So the population is going to increase. What do you see? Yeah, we see the baby boom generation here. They had children. Yeah, another generation. Oh. Now we see that the baby boomers, they are getting older. Life expectancy is increasing, so people in general are getting older. I'm sorry about those who are not speaking Dutch, because the words are in Dutch, but I will explain. If we look at the population composition, you see that from 2000 up to 2060, young people between the ages 0 to 20 sort of stays the same. Then for the working population, also sort of stays the same. Then 65 to 80 years old, it's increasing. And people older than 80, it's even going to double in the coming years. Now this is because we have more people in those ages, like the baby boom generation, but also because all those individuals are getting older. So they're staying longer in the population. Thus, hence, we having more people. Okay, so what is this projection based on? Well, first of all, fertility. In the Netherlands right now, the fertility rate is about 1.7. So hypothetically, each woman gets about 1.75 children, and it's expected to reduce to 1.7. Then mortality. How do we measure mortality? Well, first of all, life expectancy. Like I said, life expectancy is increasing. People get older. At the same time, we have the baby boom generation who are making up a big proportion of the older adults in the Netherlands. Then for immigration, emigration, very hard to project. So we're sort of assuming that both of them will increase, but well, if people migrate if one portion immigrates and the others emigrate, you sort of balance it out to 0. Okay, how is this helpful? Because now I'm going to need your help. Because like I said, projections, they're nice, but anything can happen, right? If we look at the past, we had the baby boom generation after the Second World War. This was something you could not predict beforehand. Then in the 1960s, the birth control pill was invented, which led to a whole sexual revolution. People could now have sex without having children. So this also had a big effect on fertility rates, for instance. This is what happened in the past. Now I would like all of you, hardcore demographers, to think with me about the future. Because when Statistics Netherlands made their projections, it was December 2019. We had never heard of COVID-19 at that moment, but now we have. So I would like all of you, I'm going to put you into groups, and then I will ask you to discuss in couples, to think about the following. This group over here, we are going to discuss fertility. So how is COVID-19 at this moment, and maybe also in the future, going to affect the fertility in the Netherlands? Okay, I'm going to ask you afterwards. Then these two groups over here, yes, you're looking at each other. You're going to discuss mortality. So how has COVID-19 affected mortality, and will it also affect mortality in the future? So you can think about life expectancy, for instance, as one of the factors. Migration, both immigration and emigration. Can this group do that? Yes? Okay. Then development. What do I mean with development? So maybe the economy, jobs, houses, food security, but also education. What kind of consequences do we have for development on the future projections for the Netherlands. Okay, then we have this other group. Can you do fertility? Can you raise your hand so you know? Yeah, fertility. Then the table behind, mortality. That table, okay, we're now good. The one who just put up his hand? Yes. Can you also do mortality, your table? Then those in the back, the two tables, yes. You can do migration. And then the two tables over here, you do development as well? Okay. So now you can discuss in couples if you want, or with the whole group, but keep a distance if you want. You can discuss for the next 3 minutes. And after those 3 minutes, I'm going to ask you what you came up with. Wat zeg je? Ja, luiigheid, hè? Nou, in maart dachten ze allemaal nog van wel, maar je ziet nu geen artikeltjes er meer over. Dat het nog steeds...
Ja, maar we zijn nu 6 maanden verder, denk ik. 6, 7 maanden, dus dan misschien in november. Dan.
Het zou heel duidelijk moeten zijn dan al bij verloskunde.
Precies, ja. Maar tegelijkertijd, ja, mensen ontmoeten ook geen nieuwe mensen meer natuurlijk. Dus dat, tenminste, met het uitgaan en gewoon op random plekken mensen ontmoeten. En zo mensen leren kennen. Dat is natuurlijk ook veel minder geworden. Dus.
En ja, echtscheiding en verloofscheiding is juist bij elkaar met dat het juist gezellig is.
Het zijn heel veel verschillende dingen die je kunt zeggen.
Er zat een soort discussie. Die man is psycholoog. Dus wij hadden zoiets van, ja, die hebben elkaar vast ontmoeten.
Dat is wel een leuk idee. Dus, het is echt een beetje overleg, maar een beetje... Het is wel fysiek college. Ja, natuurlijk. Ja. Voor de master of voor de bachelor was dat?
One more minute.
Op het water.
Zat er net buiten. En Leeuwarden heeft ook die terp.
Okay, let's wrap up. Make sure that at least one person at your table is able to give some feedback. Okay, let's start with fertility. So CBS, Statistics Netherlands, they said last December that the fertility rate would go down in the upcoming years from 1.75 children per woman to 1.7 children per woman. People who did fertility, yes, what kind of things should we consider when thinking about fertility?
We had a discussion that size could increase and decrease. Could increase because people are more together and therefore they have also more time because they're more home and that kind of.
Okay, so you are saying that it can increase because people are more at home and have more time to make babies? Yes?
But also decrease because
Yes, it could also decrease because there's more financial insecurity, so people may not want to risk having more children. Thank you. Okay, other people who did fertility, can you raise your hands? Who else? Yes. What did you discuss? Okay, so you sort of discussed the same, but you also said, well, when you're together in one house, you may get annoyed with each other and don't want to have sex at all. Okay, thanks. Okay, who are we missing? Who else did fertility? Or we're okay, yeah?
Basically at the same thing. Like, we believe there will be a lockdown of generation or something. Yeah, and but also the other side, like the financial insecurity will increase. So maybe people think a little bit about having kids and think it's not the best.
Okay, interesting. Thank you. So you sort of had the same ideas. So now maybe the question would be, is having children something you choose or something that sort of happens? That's the question. Thank you. Okay, let's move on to mortality. Who did mortality? Yes. Okay, let me sort of summarize what you said. So you were saying that at least on a temporary basis, mortality will increase, not only due to COVID-19, but also because for some months our healthcare system was sort of down. People were not being checked in hospitals. But you also said we have a good healthcare system, so we will recover from that and will not see a lot of effects in the long term, right? Okay. Yes, whereas in other countries, like in Sub-Saharan Africa or the US, as you said, the healthcare system is not so good and the effects could be bigger. Thank you. Who else did mortality? Yes. So you're saying it's very unpredictable how COVID-19 will develop, so we cannot really predict. Yes, so this is why we're not just hardcore demographers, but we also study people in context, because like you said, you cannot predict behavior. So this is why in population studies we look at behavior of individuals. Yeah, it's important. How am I in time? Okay. Let me move a bit more quickly. Migration. Who would like to respond? So not every table, but just one table? Yes. In the back. Okay, so if I got you well, because you're a bit far away from me, you were saying on the one hand, because of new jobs becoming available, this might actually increase migration, but it may also reduce because of travel restrictions and more jobs being done online. So you're linking migration to jobs, so to say. Yeah, okay, thanks. How about development? Who wants to respond? Yes.
We sort of talked about development on the short term, but since we're talking about like 2050, you see that, of course, like there's all kinds of trends going on. We've got soon, I think in the future, there's 10 billion people living on the world, and we are getting more urbanized, getting more like contact with each other, and even more globalized, let's say. So I think such epidemics as COVID-19, they're not really special in the future. They're going to be more frequent. Therefore, I think that, or we think that development is going to be more focused on maybe developing to handle such situations and not really think, okay, COVID-19 has been a thing of 2020, and for the next 100 years it will not happen again, because it will probably happen again, maybe in 2050. So it's very, very important to understand that we have to be prepared and develop to a society which can handle things like COVID-19 and similar epidemics, pandemics better.
Okay, so you said that because of population growth at the world level and also urbanization, we're going to face more of these types of pandemics, and instead of this just being a single event, we're going to face more of this kind of happenings, and we're going to need to be prepared for them. Okay, thank you. Because of time, I'm sort of going to wrap up. So let's go back to the projection of 2050. 19,306,000 people living in the Netherlands. Please raise your hand if after the discussions we just had, you believe that the actual population in the Netherlands will actually be higher. I see 1, 2, 2.5, 3. Okay. Who thinks that our population will actually be lower? Also only a few. Okay, yeah. What about it staying the same? Okay. Well, then I think we can conclude that we sort of project that COVID-19 is not really going to affect the projections for the Netherlands in 2050. Thank you, and let's go to the next session.
Right, yes, thank you, Billy, for your very interactive, very nice talk. So now we're quickly going to move on to our last speaker of today, which is Mr. Mark van Duin. Should I clean it? Or?
No, it's fine.
Okay.
I take the risk. Anyways, thank you very much. First of all, I want to thank Ibn Battuta for inviting us all. And I'm happy to be here to talk a little bit about real estate. Basically, my focus is more on housing markets, so I will talk a little bit more in depth about housing markets. Let me see if this thing works. You have to. Okay, well, I can talk a little bit. Well, first of all, a few lessons that I've heard about today, right? So if you talk about the future, well, you need to know about the present. And to know or to understand a little bit of the present, you need to look at the past. So you need to understand why cities look like they do now, why the Netherlands look like it does now. So let me think of the second lesson. Oh yeah, of course perfect. So some of you might see me because I teach advanced applied statistical courses in the master for the master economic geographers, population studies and real estate. And what I will usually tell my students is that, well, basically do out-of-sample predictions is quite hard, and that you need to be very cautious doing that. Same with extrapolation. Anyways, I will give it a go. So what about housing? The Dutch housing market. Already talked about this. I also used the quotes. Very good website. Most of you cannot see this, but well, a few characteristics of the current housing market. Yeah? So in the Netherlands, how many people are here that are non-Dutch? Can you raise your hands? Okay, so quite a number. Very good. Important characteristic of the Dutch housing market is that basically the market is like 60% homeowners, yeah, 30% social housing, public housing. It's quite unique, basically rent-controlled housing, and the remaining part is private rental market. And well, most of you, well, maybe we can ask, right? So, how many of you own a house here? Wow, nobody? Of course, you guys. Yeah. Private rental market? Yeah. Somebody in social housing? Well, renting from a corporation? Yeah. More or less. Okay. Any of you have housing subsidies? Some of you as well, right? No. So a little bit about the numbers. You know, these translate to like 4.5 million houses in the owner-occupied sector, 2.3 million in the corporation section, social housing, public housing, and of that number, around 1.4 million households they have basically rent subsidy. A few characteristics: high quality housing in the Netherlands. However, the current housing shortage is quite large. Yeah? It's around more than 300,000 houses are projected that we lack, which is around 4.2% of the current stock. Demography. Homeowners, yeah, first-time homeowners are around 30 years old. Yeah? So, well, if you're going to buy a house after your studies, you are very likely to be around 30 years old. So housing shortage. It's probably one of the things that's saving the housing market currently. Because of the COVID, not much happened on the housing market. We still see house prices rise. We still see that houses are very shortly on the market. So the moment a house comes for sale and it comes on the internet, and the moment when it's being actually sold is around 3 months on average. So that's very quick. And of course, house prices are relatively high because the rents have been decreasing, basically halved over the last 10 years. So what's going to happen in the future, right? With all these kind of measures. Difficult to predict, but well, maybe I'm not going to give too many predictions, but I will focus more on the challenges ahead, like Chris did before me. I made a little bit of a longer overview of it, and of course, given the time, I will not dig into all of them, but a few things that are important and that we've heard already before. Maybe an increasing demand in the urban and suburban life, although if flooding is going to happen, well, maybe we have to build new cities. Well, there's quite a large ambition by our government, our Dutch government, to build homes. More than 800,000 in the next 10 years. There's also this ambition for all homes to be gas-free, right? We're in Groningen, so, well, you probably know that we want to shut down all gas production. This is very costly. You know? Building for an aging society. Yeah? The peak of 65-plussers will lie around 2040, 2050. Yeah? So we need to take care of those people. And a large increase in demand for energy. Climate change. Luckily somebody talked already about that, but well, these things are basically challenges that we need to face. One of the fun facts, I was at a presentation a few months ago, well, just before the COVID happened, and it was from the Amsterdam Institute of Advanced Metropolitan Services or Studies, and basically they projected that given our current energy grid, yeah, they researched how many electric cars could be charged at the same time. And then you can ask, well, if you look at a city as Amsterdam, how many percentage of those households can at the same time charge their electric cars currently? And the shocking number was 10%. Yeah? So if we see this growth of electric car continues, I mean, a lot of things need to happen, or else you need to supply your own car with energy. Of course it's possible, but hey, it's pretty hard in Amsterdam to put all these solar panels on your house. There are quite some more, but okay. I want to focus a little bit more on the construction side of things. So if the European Union predicts that a lot of people, or a lot more people, will live in urban and suburban regions in 2050, I mean, well, that basically means that as real estate economists or real estate developers, we need to start building. Yeah? Again, remember, we have a shortage of 300,000 houses currently. There is a projection to build more than 800,000 in 10 years, around 80,000 houses a year. Last year it was 71,000. This year, because of the COVID and well, jobs in the construction sector were under pressure, we are expected to have around 55,000 houses built, and next year 50,000. Yeah? So that's I would say quite a challenge, if not impossible, to really build, well, that number of houses within 10 years. Don't want to sound too pessimistic, but or I think it's realistic to ask that question. But then, of course, the question: if we're building, yeah, for whom to build? Yeah, where to build? What to build? For whom to build? Because of inequality. Yeah. That's what Jan already discussed earlier on. Yeah? Do we just build for the rich, like we currently are doing? Yeah? Everybody, basically, most of the newly built houses are for homeowners, for a large part, and for a very large part the private sector. And then luckily we have some government regulations, and they build some social housing as well. But the question is, the amount of social housing, is that enough? Where to build? Well, if everything gets underwater, where do we build? Pretty hard in the Netherlands to build in our cities. Why? Because again, some rules and regulations. Most of our cities are protected, yeah, because they have an historic image. And we want to preserve that historic image. So I mean, it's really hard to adapt the current housing. Where to build? Again, I heard somebody or an architect say there was a very interesting radio week for the Dutch people, NPO 1, Met het oog op morgen. Last month, you can look up online. There were a lot of interesting chats with academics from the Netherlands talking about the housing market in the Netherlands. And basically, one of the architects said, like, well, if we cannot use these areas for agriculture anymore, why not build there? But if we want to build there, basically we need to redesign the whole philosophy or a whole landscape. And then of course what to build. Where do you want to live? I mean, again, it depends a little bit for who we're going to build. Where do you want to live when you are 30? You want to live in a house with a garden? Or do you still want to live in your apartments? No? Important question to consider. And again, in which sectors? So owner-occupied, private rental market, or social housing. Very much a political question. Yeah? So basically the topic that you gave us today is quite challenging. Yeah? Because we're just researchers and no politicians. What we do, or at least I'm an economist, I try to help these politicians get to the right decision. So I give them basically, do cost-benefit analysis to show them, well, these are economically most feasible. But again, it's not only about the economics, there's a lot of stuff going on as well. So why does construction go very slowly, and in the future it will be hard to reach that 800,000? It's because there are quite a lot of regulations. You know? Nitrogen, I heard, PFAS is another restriction or regulation that basically prevents us from building at full capacity. Zoning plans, again, back to if you wanna change the agricultural land to build houses on it, I mean, before there's an actual house there, it takes a lot of time. Yeah? The function needs to change. You guys know best about, I guess, zoning plans. But zoning plans need to change. Then you have to get a building permit. Then you need to get the materials. The materials getting more expensive, more scarce. And then we need to actually build. So it takes quite a long time before we actually have the buildings. So that's the reality check. Yeah? Building permits and housing supply are currently lagging behind. That's the reality of things. I don't want to, again, sound too pessimistic, but these are the numbers that I just told you before. And they're acknowledged by our ministry. And then again, between the brackets, a little bit of my own personal opinion is that I don't think we build enough suitable housing for starters, middle income households, and again, because of a lot of other priorities currently, we are a little bit forgetting about our aging population. Okay, let me end with that. Thank you very much.
Yes, thank you, Mark. We're almost at the end. I want to have. I would like to have your reaction on. We're just going to do like a couple seconds, 20 seconds, 30 seconds for each of one of you. And that's to make it a bit more concrete, a bit more to the point. The statement is, the Netherlands is ready for the changes waiting for 2050. And I want to start with you. Yeah. Start with Mark. Yeah.
Wow. So the Netherlands is ready for the future? So given the current, basically the ambitions that our Dutch government has in housing will be really hard to meet in 2050. A lot of things need to change before we get there. I think Chris already said, of course, we cannot really predict everything, but I would be very surprised if we reach the 800,000 houses that we construct in 2030. And that means for you guys that you will have to start save a lot of your money, because if you want to buy a house, you need to come with your own money. Yeah? Let me stop with that.
No. But I'll say a bit more. We are not ready for 2050, and we're also not ready to face the challenges that we are starting to understand. But if I look at the past 5 years, maybe even a bit longer, I see stuff developing. We are getting better. We start to understand things more. We get more policies. We get more development. So in that sense, I think we're getting better. And let's also be honest, 2050, I mean, we might not be ready for that now, but there's still a bit of time to do a lot of things to get ready. Now, we're getting better, but my main remark would always be we really also need to speed up getting better. So that's basically my message here.
So when COVID-19 happened and all classes had to go online, I think our staff managed to do that like the next day. So stuff can happen very quickly if we feel the urgency. And I guess that's often the problem, especially when you talk about climate change or long-term issues. Yeah. I think there are many issues that we don't see. For instance, when we're talking about the whole lockdown, do we even care about all the older people who are now being very isolated, who are not interacting with people on a daily basis? All these mental health issues, we're also having them in our faculty, PhD students who hardly know anyone in the Netherlands, who are working every day alone at home. I think we need also to be aware about those issues. They don't look important maybe because it's not about economy or something, but mental health, well-being, it's important. So more attention for that, please.
All right, so these are some very interesting final statements to go home with, or actually not go home with. So that's the end of today. On behalf of us, the organization, the Faculty of Spatial Sciences, I would like to very warmly thank you for being here and also for being with us online. For now, I'd like to come for all the speakers to still come up or stand up because we have a small thank you for you. Please give them one more round of applause, guys. So that means, sadly enough, the end of our event. One final big thank you to the people here at Bucksbeer for making this all possible. It's very amazing to still have a place to have our first real physical activity of the year. Our teachers, our speakers really liked it as well, to have a group in front of them to start the year off with. One remark I need to make on behalf of the people here as well. After the event, you are no longer guests of ours, but of Bucksbeer. And because of that, the HoReCa or the bar regulation regarding COVID comes into play. So we would like to kindly ask you to scan the QR code that's somewhere on the bar or somewhere in front, and to register your name, all your personal details that are now mandatory to register. And also, the menu here is very great. We are going to stay here for dinner, and you can join us as well. We're going to have a nice burger or some pork belly bows or some loaded nachos, not sure. And they just bottled these great new beers from one of the brewers. I heard they bottled them yesterday, so it's fresh as hell. Really urge you to come try it. I will. So that was it. Thank you very much, guys, for being here, and have a great night. Thank you.